That's it? Good. All right. I'm happy to do this for Jim Aton. He's a colleague of mine, river runner, although we've never done a river trip together. And one thing that's not in his talk is that Jimmy Jones did some boating and made his own kayak, did the Green River, and then down through Cataract Canyon, using a mold developed by Ron Smith that Jimmy Jones made himself. So as a river runner, I think that's pretty cool. Jimmy F. Jones is the best Grand Canyon painter that only a few Grand Canyon historians have ever heard of. Yet when you talk to art historians who actually know his work, they would rank him with the masters of the canyon. Thomas Moran, William Henry Holmes, Gunnar Whitforce, and Wilson Hurley. Not much known south of the Arizona Strip, Jones labored in relative obscurity in his nearly 4 decades as a professional artist. Just now, however, 10 years after his death, his time has come. Although Jones became a professional artist when he graduated from the University of Utah in 1961, he did not paint the grand, as he called it, until 1977 at age 44. But he had been looking at the canyon since childhood. Jones later said, "I think my enchantment with Grand Canyon has to go way back from the time I was a really young kid. The scenery certainly did sink in." Jones grew up in nearby Cedar City, Utah, and his father, Elton, was a clerk for the Utah Parks Company, or the UPC, the concessionaire for the North Rim, Zion, Bryce, and other parks. While Jones saw the Grand Canyon at a very young age, he first started to work there as a dishwasher in 1945 at age 15. Jones worked at various parks in the summer during school, but by college, first at Art Center of Pasadena and then at Utah, he was tending bar at the Grand Canyon Lodge at the North Rim. The Grand Canyon was a place he worked and recreated, a landscape he loved, but not a subject he painted. He was a figure and portrait painter. Jones' work up until 1976 was largely focused on Mexico, where he spent 13 winters between 1961 and 1975. The other was in Ecuador. He mostly painted street scenes with figures, along with some portraits. His palette reflected the influence of Andrew Wyeth, blacks, browns, raw umber, and gray. He completed a few landscapes during this period, but it was not his primary interest. He turned to landscape painting, and the Grand Canyon came about when a number of factors coalesced around 1975. One of them was that he decided to honor the nation's approaching bicentennial by painting his home park, Zion. He wintered there in a Utah Parks Company cabin near the lodge, painted the park, and had a successful show at the Phillips Gallery in Salt Lake City, spring 1977. A reviewer of the show wrote that he would like to see what Jones could do with the Grand Canyon. And Jones said to himself, "So would I." In 1977-78, he again used his Utah Parks Company connection to secure a ranger cabin about 1.25 miles from the North Rim Lodge. It changed his life. In exchange for free housing, he had to shovel snow off the lodge's roof and paint 131 bathrooms in the cabins. If this winter did not work out, he was seriously contemplating abandoning painting and going back to school in architecture. By mid-October, the lodge had closed, the heat was shut off, and Jones moved his easel to the sunroom, heated only by passive solar heat. When he started his first painting of the Grand Canyon, Angel's Gate, on October 14, 1977, he wrote in his journal about how long he had been looking at the canyon. This began a 32-year odyssey, as he called it, to paint the Grand Canyon from every accessible point. By the time he died in 2009, he had painted 128 canvases of the most sublime and awe-inspiring spectacle in the world. Angel's Gate is pretty timid in terms of his use of color, but his composition is typical of his subsequent designs as the landscape painter. He used what art historians call Claudian composition. The best of the 6 large canyon paintings he completed that winter was this one, Oza Butte. Jones did 4 winter snow scenes. Trees in a Snowstorm is the best of the 4. As the snow piled up on the North Rim that winter, Jones almost died on Valentine's Day, 1978. He had spent a hard day shoveling snow off the lodge roof. He returned to his cabin, took a long shower, and was sitting on his couch putting on his boots. Suddenly, there was an explosion. He ran out of the back door like a rocket. Jones called another ranger on the radio, and the 2 of them extinguished the fire, then spent 2 hours shoveling to find the propane tank to shut off the valve, which was buried under 5.5 feet of snow. Nonetheless, the winter there had been pretty hermit-like for Jones. Most importantly, he found what he was meant to do, paint the canyon country. Jones' year of decision, he said, saved my soul. He left the Grand Canyon in late March 1978, an artist transformed. The next winter, 1978-79, he lived in a trailer at the South Rim, which he rented from Jack Verkamp, who many of you know about. Around that time, Jones figured out a way to paint in the cab of his truck. He liked being a plein air painter, but he hated, as he said, being a sideshow. Most artists would find this extremely difficult, but Jones made it work. He said, I thought I hit upon something unique until I learned that Georgia O'Keeffe did the same thing with her Model T Ford in the 1920s. During this period, Jones established a relationship with the El Prado Gallery in Sedona and sold 20 of his Grand Canyon paintings there. Between 1978 and the early 80s, Jones returned many times to both rims to paint. Although Jones ended up painting about 400 paintings of Zion National Park and about that many of Cedar Mountain, the Grand Canyon he called My Odyssey. He believed that the Grand Canyon almost composed itself because its sedimentary layers form the base composition. Then, as he said, the vertical lines vary in width just enough to make it really interesting. But then you get all these diagonal shadows tying all this together. Everything falls into place so beautifully, so beautifully. In 1982, Jones bought property near Zion National Park in Rockville and started building his house. He had a real studio for the first time. It eventually allowed him to paint large canvases, something he had especially wanted to do since becoming a landscapist in 1976. And he really hit his stride as a landscapist. Sunrise from Hopi Point from 1985 was a breakthrough painting for him. His palette had become much richer by this point, as was his sense of the depth of space in the canyon. This is the first time he included the Colorado River in a Grand Canyon painting. Jones would become a master of canyon country skies. Although Jones mostly moved inside to work, he would still travel to the places he wanted to paint, sketching and taking photographs. But he especially loved driving out to places like Point Sublime, T.O. Point, and Toroweep to get spiritually reunited with his Odyssey. From the 1990s on, Jones painted the North Rim much more than the South Rim. He executed many from the east side of the park. At the Point Imperial and Cape Royale lookouts, one of his best is view from Cape Royale in 1993. Jones' mastery of deep space is really without equal in canyon country painting. This painting and others demonstrate an important lesson Jones learned about painting the Grand Canyon and canyon country in general. how to handle the color blue. In 1999, he finally decided to tackle Point Sublime. In 2 years, he started 9 paintings from there. One, Sunset from Point Sublime, prefigures what many consider his Grand Canyon masterpiece, which was completed 10 years later. By this time, Jones had entered the major phase of his landscape career. He was selling everything he painted at increasingly higher prices. But because he sold his work through his friend, Greg Worthington's gallery in Springdale, not many outside southern Utah knew Jones' art. He couldn't have cared less about a reputation. Clearly, by the turn of the century, Jones had mastered the Grand Canyon, as these paintings from the early aughts show. In the early 2000s, Jones was flying high. He was still growing as an artist. He was getting high prices for his canvases, close to $15 per square inch. And his house was basically finished. But in 2007, he was diagnosed with emphysema. Jones knew the end was near. He then negotiated with Southern Utah University President Michael T. Benson to give everything he had, his magnificent house, the copyright to his work, and his last show, if Benson would commit to building an art museum at the university. Jones was creating the best work of his life while painting on oxygen. These are the Grand Canyon paintings from his last show. The last is perhaps his penultimate painting of them all. Jones told his gallery owner and friend, Greg Worthington, that it contained everything he had learned about landscape painting in his professional career. Point Sublime is a Grand Canyon masterpiece that will someday be recognized along with those of Grand Canyon masters Gunnar Woodforce and Wilson Hurley. Southern Utah University purchased it from Greg Worthington as the centerpiece of the Jim Jones Gallery at the Southern Utah Museum of Art, which opened in 2016. Many call SUMA the house that Jimmy built. Although he was not known south of the Arizona Strip, Jones was appreciated by the art cognoscenti. Utah art historian Vern Swanson, in his History of Art, called him the premier landscapist of southern Utah. What amazed art historians about Jones' work was his ability to capture distance and space. Cezanne once said that the principal thing in a landscape painting is to find the distance. It is there that one recognizes the talent of a painter. And Jones certainly did that. As Swanson and art historian Donna Poulton have written, Jones' aerial perspective and sense of space is a way of seeing that people haven't seen before. And of course, painting the Grand Canyon requires an artist to try to capture distance. Few, as Aton said, in his opinion, have ever done it better than Jimmy Jones. Thank you.